Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Melanin Margin, the weekly chat show where conversations about race are never off the table. We're your hosts, Quaviondre Williams.
And Daquon Wilson.
So let's get into this week's conversation. What's hot on the table this week?
Now, the news that has been everywhere for the past week was the slap heard around the world. During this year's Oscars, comedian Chris Rock joked about actress Jada Pinkett Smith's lack of hair, comparing Pinkett Smith to G.I. Jane. Afterwards, her husband Will Smith proceeded to walk onto the Oscar stage, slap Rock, and told him, quote, "Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth," end quote. The footage quickly went viral on Twitter, with many speculating if this was real, a PR stunt, or a staged incident. Even Oscars producer Will Packer was unsure of the situation's nature, stating on Good Morning America, quote, "I thought it was a bit like everybody else," end quote. He goes on to state how Chris Rock's set was filled with unplanned improvised jokes, saying, quote, "He didn't tell one planned joke. I thought this was something that Chris and Will were doing on their own. I thought it was a bit. We hadn't practiced it," end quotes. So, with that to say, what were your initial thoughts about what happened? Could you even believe that it happened in the first place?
No, like everyone else, I kind of thought it was a bit too until I heard him using big boy cuss words on the Oscar stage on a televised event. I was like, oh no, this is real. But there are so many nuances to this conversation and so many opinions revolving around whether or not Will Smith was in the right or wrong, or whether or not it was right or wrong for Chris Rock to be hid. It was one hell of a ride to try to develop my opinion on the situation. I have to say that I'm not proud of my initial responses to witnessing the event, but I've been analyzing the arguments of others in the Black community and doing my own research to better formulate my opinion. When I did, I was able to see the flaw in many of the arguments that I was going to bring to the table in the beginning. The question that Some of the questions that sprung to my mind when it first came up was, number one, how could he do this? Number two, how could he do this in front of white people? Isn't he just proving the stereotype? And number three, I thought Jada's a grown-ass woman. She can handle herself. She doesn't need a man to defend her. Those are the first three questions that I had in my mind. And I had to go over them and really unpack what I was thinking. Um, those thoughts were unfiltered and products of white supremacy, respectability politics, and undercover misogynoir. And like many people who exist in intersectionality, for me, that is existing as a Black, gay, and non-binary person at the same time. This allows me to look at a situation with more nuance and say a cis, straight white person. The world through the eyes of cis straight white people is more black and white than a marginalized person. We're able to see shades of gray because we know that the rules and systems in place were built to work against us. With that intersectionality in mind, I was able to break down why my original system of thinking was wrong. The first question I asked myself was, how could he do this? Well, in the old adage, talk shit, get hit. I mean, that's just the reason. Whether or not I agree with what he did doesn't really matter. The fact is, someone he loved was being picked on by someone right in front of his face, literally a few feet away. There is only so much ribbing someone can take before they reach their limit, and it looks like Will Smith has reached his limit in that situation. This wasn't Chris Rock's first jab at the Smith family, and it seemed that this was the jab too far. There is a level of empathy one has to exude in a situation like this. Jada and Will have their entire lives in the public eye. They've been criticized for their parenting style, their relationship, their belief, and so on and so forth. Constant scrutiny, constant jokes, and constant ridicule. Yes, one could argue that they signed up for this because they're celebrities, but people seem to forget that celebrities are human too. When I looked at this moment again through that mindset, I was able to see that this is a very human moment and human pain that was expressed in anger. Jada's struggle with alopecia and having no choice but to go bald was an incredibly difficult journey for her, as she was having to do this because of no choice of her own. This wasn't something that she chose to do. She has pointed out on her show on the Red Table Talk that she just embraced it, but it doesn't mean that she's still not sensitive about it. We're not privy to the tears that Jada has shed with Will about her hair loss, the fear she's expressed about her beauty because of how Eurocentric standards of beauty have made Black women particularly insecure about their hair. And we're not privy to just how hard it was for her to accept this new reality. Will Smith is. We all know for a fact that hitting someone is wrong. While feelings don't excuse those actions, they sure as hell explain them. And I can understand why he made the decision that he did. And then there's the thought about how could he do this in front of white people? Isn't that just proving the stereotype? Well, we have been taught as Black people to remain still. Don't ruffle any feathers. When our feelings are hurt, suck it up and move on. To react in any way that has not been white sanctioned as appropriate, especially in the times of slavery, would mean being beaten or killed. So such fears still exist in us today. In 2022, we are still taught to placate white people, to make sure that they are make sure they're comfortable, and to do whatever it takes to maintain and remain in their spaces because of the toxic belief that being invited into a predominantly white space as a Black person is quote unquote a privilege that should be treated with the utmost respect, even if those white people aren't treating us with dignity and respect. We're still taught not to express our emotions passionately, because if we do, we're vilified and we're put into the angry Black man or angry Black woman stereotype. With all this being understood, I realized why I was so angry with Will Smith and why he did this. It wasn't because of his reasoning. It was because I was afraid of what white people will do to him and to other Black nominees and to other Black performers who deserve to take up space in that award show. I was afraid that we'd lose the privilege, quote unquote, to exist in a white space, because subconsciously I knew that as Black people, we are seen as a monolith. As Black people, we are not allowed the space to exist as individuals in society in the way that white men and women are. When a member of a marginalized community falls out of grace of the cis, straight, white people, that one person's actions becomes the litmus for how white society judges all people within that marginalized community. I'm ashamed to say that when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock, all I could think was, how could this change white people's view of us? Instead of thinking, why does it matter in the fucking first place? If this whole situation has taught us one thing, it's this: white people do not need an excuse to vilify us. Because as long as the system of white supremacy stays in effect, marginalized people will always be the problem, no matter how deeply we adhere to respectability politics. We will always be shown that we are not truly welcome in a space that was created for and designed for by them. This platform was created by them to put themselves to a higher standard and degree than marginalized community. Now, lastly, I want to speak on my third thought, and that is Jada. I said that Jada didn't need a man to defend her. And at first I thought that Will's actions were just a show of macho man activity, toxic masculinity at its peak. I said that Jada is an independent woman and she doesn't need a man to speak up for her because her voice is just as strong. In my way of thinking and trying to be inclusive and standing up for the rights and abilities of women, I unintentionally upheld misogynoir. Jada Pinkett Smith is a Black woman, and Black women as a whole have constantly had to defend themselves, constantly to speak up for the oppression they go through, and constantly have had to deal with the backlash of speaking their minds. Even in this fucking situation, so many men, many of whom are Black, turn the blame on Jada for not stopping Will, or using the fact that she talked about her affair with August Alsina on the Red Table Talk as reasoning as to why Will shouldn't have defended her. In a situation where Jada was the one whose feelings were hurt, she is still being talked about in such a negative light. And when she raised no hand of her own, Jada, like many Black women, have had to defend herself against all men, including Black men who are supposed to protect her. She has endured intense ridicule and intense hatred for her relationship with August Alsina. Everyone is out here defending Will or saying that she dogged him out. And the reality is, Will has gone on record as stating that he has had relationships outside of their marriage as well. She has been the dog walked by the media in so many different occasions and has always had to just move forward and let it go. She has had to be the strong Black woman so many times over. She has had to be this rock. And in this particular case, even when Chris Rock did what he did, she moved on. She rolled her eyes because she didn't want people to see her as an angry Black woman if she stepped up and said something. So yes, she could have done all those things. She could have gone to the Red Table Talk and talked about it. She could have gone to the press and talked about it, but she shouldn't have to. Will stepped in and did the thing that patriarchy has made it difficult for Jada to do. Men who hate and disrespect women don't care about the opinions or reactions of women because they don't see them as the same level as them. The only people who have enough systemic power to check a man is another man. And in this case, it was one successful Black man checking another successful Black man on his disrespect. When we see and say protect Black women, it's not just pretty words. It needs to be actionable in everyday life. Again, not saying that Will Smith smacking Chris Rock was the action needed to take place, but what I will say is that sometimes violence is the only option left to have your stance heard. I had to check myself on the fact that while Black women don't need men to save them, they deserve Black men who will fight alongside, protect, and uplift them. So Daquon, I know that was a lot to say. I need you to go ahead and get your situation in. Go ahead.
Ooh, that was a dissertation, and I'm here for all of it because I think that this is very much a situation where initial thoughts change and evolve over time because it is so layered. And I think that, as you said before, we're really seeing the ramifications of slavery, of oppression, of all of these different systems of white supremacy placing an expectation on Black people, placing an expectation on everyone. And that changes how we react in a certain situation, especially one like the Oscars. I know for me, my initial thoughts were just like, this can't be real. I don't want this to be real. I want to be like waking up the next morning and everybody's talking about, all right, it was staged because X, Y, Z, it coming out that it was a fake, it was a PR stunt, whatever, so that we can move on. Because in me was this deep fear of all of the discourse that would come around this situation and all of the just hateful rhetoric that would re-arise in this situation because it's a Black man on the podium, a Black man on this at stake. And that was a big reason why I wanted it to be fake. I wanted it not to have any impact so we can just move on. But then I had to really think. I had to think about why it's so important that we don't just push issues like this aside, because if we never have these conversations, we'll never have true progress. And so, even though I didn't want this discourse to happen, this discourse needed to happen. We needed to have these conversations. We needed to be like, hey, X, Y, and Z, I think whatever. And then step back and be like, wait, why do I think this? And ask those questions you ask yourself of just like, why am I thinking this? Where did this come from? Who should we really be focusing on in this situation? Because that's a real big part of this entire situation. Because as soon as it came out, everybody wanted to have an opinion, literally flooding every single timeline. If you are scrolling on TikTok, every other, if not every video was about Will Smith and the Oscars. On your Twitter timelines and Instagram, Facebook, whatever, everywhere you saw this. You could not escape it because everybody was sharing their opinion. And it took me a while, but I really had to think, yes, this happened on a global stage. Yes, this happened entering into your space because you were watching it at home or whatever. But at the crux of this is a dispute between 2 to 3 people. And so when everybody is giving their opinion, I'm kind of like, well, what is this really doing? Like, what are you actually adding to the conversation? Because you say that you have been impacted in this very particular way, but sometimes we lose sight of how things impact other people. So I feel like in this situation, so many people were censoring themselves rather than censoring the people, the human beings that were in this situation and how they feel and how did this come to be. And, you know, like they say, opinions are like assholes. Everybody has them, and a lot of them sure do stink. And so we saw all of this just like nastiness come out. I'm sorry, that was a terrible, terrible analogy. I can't stop thinking about it. But we're going to move on because we saw all this nastiness come out, and I think that is to say that many people show their true colors. Many people
Mm,
use this as a time to put out all of the racist and, misogynoir rhetoric and dog whistles, because we saw even politicians using this to campaign, being like, this is what the liberals want and things like that. And it's like, what do you and your politics really have to do with this situation? You are capitalizing on an unfortunate situation for your gain to create some type of commentary that frankly has nothing to do with the situation. And so I really wanted to rethink how I thought about this discourse, because frankly, at this point, it's happening. And I think
mm-hmm,
that moving forward, I wanted to be able to respond more to the discourse than the incident itself, because there's one way you can go about thinking about it. You can say, I would have handled it differently and then
mm-hmm,
move on. And I
mm-hmm,
frankly think that that is the best way to approach it, because so often you see, he should not have done that, violence you shouldn't do, blah, 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 blah,
mm-hmm,
blah, blah. And it's like, say you wouldn't handle that way and move on. And
mm-hmm,
frankly, can you actually say that? Because like you said before, Andre, we don't know what was happening behind closed doors. There
mm-hmm,
is this history between them, and frankly, this could have been the straw that broke the camel's back. And so if you've never been in a situation where your loved one, somebody so close to you, was
mm-hmm,
being ridiculed not only by a comedian, but a world renowned comedian on a global stage with all of their peers watching you. Like, I have to think about how Jada felt in this moment. Yeah, you go to the Oscars and there's comedian cracking jokes, whatever, whatever, but you have the entire world watching you. You have every single one of your peers who are also actors, directors, producers,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
literally your colleagues seeing this and seeing the reaction and everything like that. And so it's a huge deal to really focus on who's actually being hurt in this situation and take some time to decenter yourself and center the people who are affected most, which often we forget about.
Exactly. I fully agree. And I really want to touch on what you just said too about the fact that, this is a comedian on a global stage making this kind of remark. And so, of course, for Jada, she might have chosen in that moment to brush it off and just be like, all right, whatever. But we don't know what would have happened when she got home. We don't know what have happened
Right.
or what kind of tears she's already shed about this whole situation. And now to have yet more attention being put on a place she's super probably sensitive about and probably a little bit insecure about is probably incredibly difficult.